The first kind of important impression, an important idea that we sort of started to target on this building was the fact that the building is sited, on the river. It's on the edge of Manhattan. It's near these kind of landmark buildings by Richard Meyer. It sort of ties in the neighborhood with the edge, and the idea was to really do something that played a kind of a sort of tectonic and a kind of game, let's say a kind of architectural dialogue between Meyer's buildings and the more sort of finer, filigreed, older work of or architecture that exists in the neighborhood. But in fact, prioritizing the contemporary and prioritizing the sort of elegant and the kind of spectacular, and then doing that through architectural elements. The actual really kind of first move was this kind of cascade or this sort of crystal cutting of the facade. And the idea being that the sort of gesture of the glass pointing either to the sky or to the ground produces a kind of animated surface, a kind of beautiful crystalline surface that plays against the different sort of skies, even the cars going by become part of the animation of that surface. And I think, the bet is it'll be very, very well liked. It'll be kind of part of the neighborhood very, very quickly because of its sort of sensitivity to the street. Then at the ground level, the building has another kind of presence in the city and promotes another kind of elegance in domestic architecture, I think. We were very conscious of the fact that, that the notion of sort of overhangs, canopies, ground floor access, picked up here in Meyer's building in a very kind of modernist statement. But here then sort of trying to make it a little bit more sort of, I guess, finer and more, I use the word filigreed, or more musical, let's say, on the street. And we used as a cue, which actually became a cue for a lot of the building, sort of notions of contemporary art and the history of New York City in terms of art culture. Whether we're kind of carefully quoting Lichtenstein with a sort of perforation on the panels, or whether we're sort of looking at the sort of Juddean or James Turrell kind of influences on the quality of light hitting the building, the sort of stacking of the geometries and so on. So the building becomes a sort of anecdotal and playful adventure into contemporary art tendencies in New York City, and particularly in the mid to late 20th century and early 21st century. As you go into that lobby, the lobby off the street, which people will be able to see as they go by and people will use as their place of residence, this is people's homes and so on, is really being designed around the idea of a kind of new notion of luxury. It's an idea of taking kind of the, let's say, the sort of Upper East Side paradigm of a foyer with flower bouquets and Victorian or Louis XIV furniture, and then flipping it on its head and having a sort of space that is highly contemporary, very, very sort of elegant and beautiful again, but not so much so that you're in a kind of fashion statement or that you're in some sort of, that you're being imposed upon. It has to have a kind of quality and warmth, I think, and dignity that people need when they come home after a hard day's work, or people come to visit, or they're meeting business associates, or whatever it is. So we're mannering, you could say, the whole lobby, I don't see the drawings up here of that, around this sort of notion of luxury as you find it in sort of state-of-the-art yachts, interiors of jets, interiors of high-performance automobiles, and so on. It's really kind of interesting in architecture when you cross thresholds and you move from one state of thinking and one state of sort of consciousness, let's say, to another, and it alters you somehow. I think it's one of the powers of architecture in general, throughout history. And so we try and do it in all of our projects. I think here this transition from your work, your daily life, the street, the city, the traffic jams, the mania of what it is to live in a city, and then you will go through some kind of a transitional zone, and then you enter into your domicile. Then we go up into the apartments where we've tried to keep again there's a sort of signature aspect to all the apartments. They have a sort of refinement and design. We keep the design sort of in them, but again, never impositional or heavy-handed. It's all meant to be the kind of design that you can live with, but not the kind of design you live with that is sublimated to or sort of, living with the banal. It's high design that you can live with. We've basically taken standard ideas behind kitchens and cabinetry and all the sort of accoutrements of domestic interior architecture in these kind of places, and then slightly tweaked them. The whole place has been sort of tweaked to the point where, you may notice it over, there may be a dinner party, and people looking over and go, my goodness, that kitchen is a little strange, actually. I didn't realize when I first walked in, it looked relatively, and you say, yeah, well, the architects, you notice everywhere there's this sort of moments of slight rupture of the norm. So whether it's the introduction of secondary materials that glide across, primary materials, whether it's the sort of driving of all the appliances into surfaces, and even sort of doing these below cabinet refrigerators, sub-zeros, you have a sense that the place has all been sort of intelligently thought about in terms of how to live with design. The bathrooms also have this sort of, this kind of gestural quality in the architecture of looking for, again, tweaks on the norm, or tweaks on normal conditions. Whether it's the wrapping of corian to produce these sort of contained rooms of tub and shower. We're using a colored glass that slides across and produces sort of, again, sort of interior or kind of micro-atmospheres within the building. Making it not opulent and over the top, but rather sort of precise and atmospheric, and a kind of core of what's happening in the entire building is kind of key. They become these sort of, spaces that aren't, sort of hidden away, and they're more spa-like, and they're key to the planning. And I think it's something that's same with the kitchens. I mean, the idea that the kitchen is not a hidden off kind of, room where people don't know. It's part of the living space, and depending on how you want to use it, you either can sort of have it as a kind of constantly sort of active place, or you can sort of hide everything and make it just a sort of backdrop to a larger living environment. One thing is that all the apartments are corner apartments, so I think that's pretty interesting. I mean, you always have sort of interesting views one way or the other. They've all optimized those corners. The structural system is contained within it. The sort of operable windows on the sides, where you can actually almost have, in fact, a balcony in your apartment is quite a beautiful thing. I think quite fantastic. And as you get up into these penthouses with the swimming pools and the double story, you sort of have these beautiful glass homes, let's say, that are above the building, and in fact have, again, remarkable views and sort of two decks on each side. So what happens is on the sides we've introduced this glass with this sort of honeycomb material embedded in the glass, and using that as a way to give you floor to ceiling glass sort of windows, let's say, on these, especially on these side units. But by virtue of bringing this material into the glass, both at the bottom up to a certain height, almost a balustrade height, and at the top, creating a sort of shoji screen, sort of ephemeral shoji screen-like frame. In my mind, what it does, and we see it all day here when we've been living with it here, is that it produces all kinds of spatial and visual effects. Sometimes you think you're looking on a kind of Thomas Roof photograph. The framed view becomes like an Andreas Gursky photograph. So it gives you this kind of, especially since these views are up into Manhattan, I think, depending on the quality of the day and the light, you get these very, very compelling framed views from these windows looking across the island. It's always been for us a dialogue between in terms of materials, new and exciting and innovative versus what do people expect, what's traditional and what's the norm. And we play this oscillating game all the time. But even for the untrained eye, let's say, or the unkind of, converted, there will be a sense of newness and something very, very fresh down there, right? It's not going to be nostalgic in a sort of material sense. There are certain sort of emotionally based things that take place if you really are in a kind of, if you're seriously sort of drawn to art and looking at it from that point of view as opposed to what its market value is or its star system or whatever. And I think that that emotional side, that emotive side is really critical because, yeah, light becomes this constant theme in the building, right? I mean, whether it's the light, as Lisanne said, that you cross on the threshold of the entry, whether it's the way light actually comes in through this glass. We're using two different glass types on the facade. So from the interior, There'll be a slight variation in nuance in that. The way the light comes in from the sun versus the reflective light off the street or out of the city. The light from the sky, from the river. The kind of notion of distorting views slightly and creating sort of optical effects. If you're sitting in your living room and a ship is going by and it hits that corner glass and it kind of double reflects and the ship splits into two. Being New York-based architects, getting a chance to actually be one of the few international architects who actually are based here, who get to build here, it became really important to us that we look into the DNA of this place, and then we, so most of the people I've referred to, most of the kind of tendencies or phenomenal side of art, are people who reacted to there's photographers, right? Remarkable New York photographers who talk about light and images and sort of displacement of reality into some other kind of sphere. Marcel Duchamp, it goes on and on. So I don't know. I mean, it's taking all of that and then producing something sublime and not overtly resting on any particular place, right? So you're not living in a sculpture. You're not forced to look at the world as if you were Thomas Roof, with cataracts, or something. I mean, you're not like in a kind of, it's just subtle background information to domesticity. And I think for us too, for both Lizanne and I, it's kind of interesting, the use of the glass, the technologies in here, the laser cutting, the computer-generated stuff, the simulations, the whole building is a kind of mediated gesture, let's say, and it's mediating light, it's mediating the city, it's mediating the East River, it's spending a lot of time kind of, and also even the way even the interiors start to slightly mediate, typical domestic life, is in a way a nod for us towards the Eames's, a little bit of that too. It's a kind of a bow to the whole kind of, notion of media as experience. We understand the need for signature, we understand the need for design, we understand the need for quality and all of these things. But we also asked ourselves a very, very important question right off the bat, which was, what is it about this place that makes this place unique? Not only the site, but the city. What is it about people who want to live here? What drives people into these places to want to buy these places other than the real estate market? And start to sort of, tap those things in a very, very, careful way. I think the reason we rely on abstraction and on phenomena and on musicality and on, these kind of instruments in our work is that if you start to quote anything directly or work with anything sort of, point blank, it has, and we've noticed this in most of our work. I mean, we've managed to have most of our work stay contemporary and stay on, even though it's stuff we did quite a while ago, because we've deflected any kind of overt sort of stylistic tendency or sort of flavor of the year. I'm pretty well convinced that what will appeal to people in this place is that touching those sort of buttons or nerve endings of the sense of new quality, a spatial quality that is particular to New York, but also new. Here, there's an image aspect, but sooner or later, it's a visceral aspect, and sooner or later, it's something that I think will, that to me is very particular to these kind of places in this marketplace. There's a visceral, sort of affinity and desire that comes into play, and I think that our use of materials and the way we've sort of mannered the interiors and this careful game we've played between radical departures and conventional, let's say, expectations. We are probably not far off the demographic in terms of that, and so the durability of the place versus its delicateness, the sort of the wear and tear of the place, what it's like to live and what it's like to have a kid running around or whatever in a loft-like environment, all that is really ingrained. I mean, every time we make a detailed decision here, it's very much it's conceptual and artistic, but at the same time, there's some pretty down-to-earth, pragmatic things that we've made decisions on all along the way. Because, we said if this were our place, what would it need to be like? When you go down the west side, this building triggers visually and sparks a kind of potential renaissance or a potential proliferation into the city. Like, what if the city were to actually become more cognizant of its animated potential and its sort of beauty and so on? what would happen if this urbanism proliferated and kind of seeped in. Important architecture is catalytic and starts a mechanism of responses. At the end of the day, you walk down this place, you may run your finger against this material, or you may look at it in the way light plays off it, and then you slip into this, this foyer that's sort of, mannered as we have it, and through the light, through the threshold, into the elevator, which hopefully is really, keeps that going, and then, into the hallway, the lighting system, and so on, the way that works, the glass doors with the numbers embedded behind them, and so on, and then into your place. Bilbao now is seriously a piece of architecture, not when it was published on the cover of the New York Times 10 years ago. Then it was like the potential for it. And now it's got the patina of history, time, the city, what it's done, and the way people actually have experienced it. So I think that's, we're very conscious of that. We're not, that's probably why we deflect this sort of tendency to just be stylish or sort of, affected in the design side, and look more for places in which people will embed their memory and time in, and then it has longevity.